Good morning or good afternoon, class. My name is John Davis, and I'll be presenting my project manager interview. The person I interviewed was Joan Dowdy. I came into contact with Joan while working with the North Carolina Department of Revenue, where I currently work, and I was put in contact with her by a colleague, which I'll get into here in a second. So the first question I actually asked Joan, because I really didn't have any background information on her, was what kind of degree, how did you get started in project management? It was very interesting to find out that Joan actually had no formal education on project management, nor did she have a 4-year degree. She had only had a 2-year associate's degree in business administration that she actually got fairly recently. So I thought that was a very interesting path that she took to be a project manager. So starting out, she actually, and I don't have this on her work experience on this slide, but how she came into project management. She actually began to work as an administrative assistant for a building company, and from there they had Microsoft Access, and her boss told her, hey, listen, we just got this, I want you to learn it as much as you can so you can teach other folks. So that's exactly what she did, and so she found her niche and slowly started working on IT things and projects within the company, developed a skill set. So that's how she got into it. She took that, parlayed that into another job, and she became, actually with that same company, the Vice President of Information Systems. And again, without a formal degree, which is pretty impressive, more formal schooling on project management. From there, she left to be a IT manager with a different company, and that was actually with the Raleigh-Durham Airport Authority, which was interesting. She was part of the governance, program management, and security. From there, she went to become an IT project manager, where I met her with the Department of Revenue. She was there for about 3 years. We crossed paths just a little bit. I'll share an experience on the next slide. However, what she worked on there was dealing a lot with what the business needs were, but more on the IT side of it, obviously, hence the title of IT project manager. And then most recently, she left back in October 2018. I didn't know that until I interviewed her, but that she had taken another job with Charter Communications as an implementation project manager, and she's been working there for just a couple of months. And then she actually told me during the interview that she was going to be laid off here shortly. So hate that for her, but she does have a lot of experience, over 25 years of IT project management experience. As well as she got her PMP certification back in 2011, which obviously I think will serve her well down the road. With that great experience she has, I'm sure she'll find another job. And just for everybody out there, that's not an actual picture of Joan, but I thought it was a good one because that kind of looked like my notes for seeing how she became and got into the project management field. So how did I get in contact with Joan? Of course, I mentioned earlier that we used to work at the Department of Revenue together. However, we didn't cross paths very often. Her being on the IT side, I on the business side. But one of my fellow colleagues, who was an instructional designer, actually put in contact with Joan since she was I told her about the class and what I was looking for. And so she set up this meeting with us, and we actually went to a very classy establishment to conduct this interview, Charlie Irish Pub. It was actually very close to where she currently works, and so it was a nice place to kind of relax setting, able to eat and talk through some of these questions. And so it was very different from maybe a typical interview, but it turned out very well. So backing up just a tad, whenever I first met Joan while working at the Department of Revenue, she was actually over a huge website project. We were converting into a newer platform for our website. It was a huge deal throughout our department, and she was the project manager for that. And I remember sitting in a training class. We're about probably a month or two from going live with the website, and she was training everyone. The training was going fine. There were a couple of hiccups, as you would with any sort of project and training, and a person in the crowd who disagreed with going to a new website platform, kind of bashed her a little bit, to bash the project. Why are we doing this? Kind of raised their voice and whatnot. And Joan handled herself with such calmness and a very thorough and thoughtful, mindful response to this person to calm them down. It was a question too that she couldn't answer, and she calmly just said, "You know what? I'm not sure, but I'll get back to you. But I understand your concern, and we'll certainly address that. What's your name?" Took down their contact information and said that they would follow back up with them. So that was kind of my lasting impression of her. I just dealt with her on this one project, not much one-on-one contact at all. But I did, after that, I did go up to her and say I was very impressed from how she handled that customer. And so that's always stuck in the back of my mind. So whenever I was talking to the instructional designer who got us together, I was really excited that she mentioned that the background that Joan had, and this was kind of exactly what I was looking for as far as this interview. So obviously I used some of the standard questions that Dr. White had given us to use, as well as ask some of my own questions. And myself, ditto facto, being a project manager in my current role with training, I have to deal with a lot of difficult team members. And so that was one of the things that I really wanted to find out from her and her experience. How did she deal with them? Because like I said, it goes back to that first experience with her, and she handled herself so well. I wanted to kind of get some insight with that. So that was one of the kind of the big things that I wanted to learn and try to take away. So what did we talk about in our meeting and interview? So one of the question I asked were, what are the primary issues that project managers have? And the first thing out of her mouth was leadership changing scope. She said it happens all the time, and that was kind of where I was introduced to the words or the phrase scope creep. And that's a huge concern with them. So leadership gives them something that they need to do, and then they take it, they're on a roll, and then the leadership stops and says, "You know what, why don't we just add this in there? Or can we do this?" Well, obviously that can be a big problem if they're really involved with that and can extend the project time. But then again, their expectations haven't changed. They think that you can still do it in that exact time frame, which now thinking about it and thinking about that phrase, that happens to me a lot. And so that was very relatable. And actually I had to stop myself in the tracks because I was essentially a person who was in leadership and in charge of a couple of project managers for my team. And I actually did some reflection and thought, you know what, I've really done that recently. How about we add this or do this? I think that would make it better. And it definitely extended our project time. And so that really hit home with me. I could definitely understand that and how that could impact for sure. The next thing was resources. So this really all centered around important people leaving positions that were on your project management team and how to deal with that. And so that, when I interviewed Joan back in middle to late February, we're just getting started on our project plans. And so that immediately got me to thinking about the risk management plan. And so that is a big thing. She goes, you just make sure that you have a backup. Make sure that you always have a plan in place. Hence my picture on the right side of the screen here. To whenever resources leave, that you have a plan in place to be able to minimize the risk. We did talk about environmental factors, and specifically to the Department of Revenue, which she used to work at, and where I worked with, is we have to deal with the legislator. We have to deal with law changes, and we have to deal with hurricanes that may come in. That all impacts our work and timeliness to get things done. And I can definitely relate to this because as part of my role in training, we do tax law training. So if the General Assembly comes in the summer and they decide they want to change an individual income tax law, it's my responsibility to make sure that gets communicated publicly, as well as train our own employees on that. And so whatever we're working on, projects that we had, that can certainly affect the timeline, and it's basically just drop everything you do to make sure that you get those changes implemented. So those factors to deal with, that you kind of have to factor and think about those things. They may or may not happen, but you have to factor those into your other project plans as far as a realistic timeline. The phrase, people want it yesterday. So what she meant by that was leadership. They want things done quickly, and they want timely, and it's really kind of you building relationships and with leadership to make them understand that if we just go by the project, here it is, here's our end result, this is the timeline we're trying to achieve, let's stick to that. We can't hurry these things up, otherwise we might have a product that is less than stellar. And so it's really about communicating that early and often, which we talked a lot about in our communication section within our book. So that's always going to be a conflict that you're going to have to deal with, is that the leadership is going to want that project or task done yesterday. Documentation. So I have this one all caps for a huge reason. This is something that was a big takeaway for me too, is that when you do have those environmental factors, you do have those changes in scope, and keep those managers and leadership honest by having them sign off on milestones. So documenting those changes, having clients sign off if you have clients, and making sure that is, because if they start to do those scope creeps, and you don't have that information, they can hold that against you sometimes, in her case and her experiences. And so I thought that was big, because a lot of times I see my projects rushed a little bit, and sometimes I have to cut out things that are documentation might be one of those things, so we can move ahead. I've got to prioritize my time. And she, again, maybe stop and think, maybe that's not such a good idea. Maybe I need to write down everything that might change in the course of a project. Understanding the biggest impact. So again, this goes back to the planning stage. Really sitting down as it relates to the risk management and communication. All right, where are things, could they potentially go wrong? And who are the big players in the game? Who do I need to make sure that I'm keeping satisfied, understanding their triggers and being self-aware of yourself, as well as who are going to be the issues, who do I need to get going in this project to make sure that it's going to run as smoothly as possible. So identifying those things early is definitely key, and being able to influence them. So lessons learned. So this was a big one, because we actually just recently finished a new hire training. We had, in my job, we had about 15 people that we just had come in, start in January, and we just finished a month-long training. And so I wanted to get back together to do some lessons learned. Obviously, with anything, there were pros and cons with how it went. And I asked her, what was her best methods in doing lessons learned. So she said, obviously, meeting on one-on-one, people are more open. You uncover resource constraints maybe leadership decisions that were made that were told to that one person that may have not been told to use the project manager or anybody else in the project team. So they're much more, if you build that relationship, much more apt to share that in a one-on-one setting. Obviously, that's a little bit more time consuming, so you may have to be selective in who you conduct an interview with one-on-one and the lessons learned, but that's a really great one to get some real information. Smaller groups, focus groups, they can be good. Sometimes people are more willing to share in a group setting. You get that one person going, another person that may be a little bit more quiet kind of chimes in, and it gets the ball rolling to get you some good information. Because it's not necessarily what you want as a bashing, she said, but let's get all the bad stuff out. Let's learn what we can do better to make things go smoother in the future, and identify some knowledge gaps. And the thing with having focus groups or smaller groups or even larger groups is definitely some personality conflicts can affect the meetings. They may call out people in the meetings and that are in there, they're on the project team, and it's up to you to kind of handle that. So directing the questions and really being a good moderator and facilitator to be able to get to the root cause of the problem, not necessarily the specific person. And that, she said, that's very important, to concentrate on the problem, not the person. So I thought that was a great takeaway. I actually recently, after meeting with her, we had a lot of people that were involved with our project, and so we ended up sending out a survey monkey to get to the bottom of it, and actually asked them, as one of the questions, would you like to be a part of a focus group? And actually only 50% said yes. So I thought that was very interesting, so I decided to do the one-on-one. Of course, the survey monkey was anonymous, but I did end up doing the one-on-one with some key players and got some further information that was not shared in the survey monkey. So that was great takeaways from Joan. Definitely learned a lot about those items that are listed. So, takeaways from Joan. A large portion of our meeting was spent talking about emotional intelligence and relationships. She said that relationships are the absolute key in project management. You've got to understand the pain points of others, what's in it for them, what's important to them, how to motivate, influence, and earn their trust. This kind of goes back to the emotional intelligence, and I was really excited to get to Module 5 and reading a little bit more about emotional intelligence, because I found it so fascinating, and it's so true. It's really just kind of how you handle yourself as well as build these relationships. And so she has some great things that I wrote down was, be emotionally mature to handle failed deadlines and other failed things. Don't just deflect it and say, this person did this, or this is where it failed. Take responsibility and be able to own your actions and hold yourself accountable. Cliques. She said, remove yourself from small groups or cliques, because other project members, they look at that. They look at who you interact with, whether you think it or not, they're always watching you. And if you remove yourself from those and kind of be your own player, but have a team mindset, you're more likely to get everybody behind you in projects. Don't make it about yourself. Make it about we, the team. It's the team's win on the project. Even simple stuff in emails saying, we did this or we did this, even though that you may have actually done that task. Talk about a we, because it's a team thing, and people take notice of that and are more able to trust you and know that it took a whole entire team's effort to do that. Asking open-ended questions with people and building relationships. Have a sense of humor, humility, being humble. Like I went back to the example with her, and I hadn't even told her at this point, how much I was impressed with her, during our interview. Of course, I told it to her that day when I saw her, how she dealt with that difficult person. But she said it's fine to say that I don't know, and just as long as you're following up, humble yourself. Don't sit there and try to babble on, thinking that you can just talk your way through it, because people will pick that out eventually. Maybe not that first time, but that second or third time, they could really do that. So being humble, state what you know, state what you don't know, and become better after that. So that really gains a lot of respect with everybody when you do that, because they know that you got some humility to you. And then calmly reacting to things. That was a huge thing. Hide your sweat a little bit. Put that in quotes if you could see me. And understanding your own triggers. So that kind of goes back to being self-aware, which is a big part of EQ, emotional intelligence, and understanding yourself. So I thought those are very fascinating, and I thought this image right here really kind of says it all. You can make all the right decisions in the world, be balanced in performance, but if you're not self-aware, socially aware, and you are not having great relationships, the iceberg, that's the bigger part of it, is down below. That's where the stuff that matters. You may be able to get away with the IQ and on one project, but you're going to be working with these people going forward, and you need to be able to maintain those relationships. And so I thought that was a huge takeaway, and something that I'm definitely trying to apply in my own work. So I thought that was very interesting that she said this as well, as people automatically withhold information or from participating. And I guess myself, I'm always wanting to give information, because I know how important feedback is to getting better, and so I don't really hold back in that regard. But that kind of struck me as, okay, well, most people actually do that. They withhold information, and so I thought that was just a kind of a mind-blowing thing for me, to think about others and being more aware, which kind of goes back to emotional intelligence. And so to combat that, she said you really kind of have to focus on those people, and I know our book talked about this as well. I thought she had read the book, to be honest with you. She was saying so much, but combating that is showing how this project, or by them doing this task, how it would benefit them. How can this improve them, gain a new skill, or how will it make this project better? So you really have to spend some time, and it goes back to, again, building the relationships with those folks. All right, so recap and going forward. So one thing first and foremost is I gained a valuable contact from speaking and interviewing with Joan. She's actually already started to be a mentor to me, and given that she has some insight into where I work, certainly is a huge help, as well as she could relate very easily, although a lot of things that she mentioned are very transferable, so to any place that you work. So she's been very great about emailing me if I have any questions, and really been a great mentor to me so far. In fact, the change management, the paper that we just wrote in Module 4, my plan is actually I'm over about 6-7 trainers, and we had just gotten Captivate licenses for all of them, but nobody has an instructional design background, and so we don't have any training. And so I'm trying to make this change and implement this new training to get our folks the ability to be able to start making e-modules. And so I explained that to Joan actually on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and she's actually been helping me with this, and it's on her own personal time, and that means a lot. So I'm definitely very much appreciative of everything she's done, and she's definitely helped me with tying some things from the book, as well as from her personal experience, into doing my actual job. So very thankful for that. She's also sent me some project management training. She's, of course, she's part of the, got her PMP certificate, and she's involved with the Institute, Project Management Institute. And so she sent me some materials from their meetings, and I thought it was a great PowerPoint that she sent me recently. And if anybody's interested, I'll be glad to send that over to them. It doesn't have voiceover, but it is just a nice PowerPoint to be able to review and get some more ideas on how to implement some things into your project management. Another good thing that she gave me was actually on the right here is Harvard Business Review's 10 Must Reads on emotional intelligence. So I did pick up that book and I've begun to read it. I think I'm on chapter 2, but it's great. It gives some real life instances of how to deal with certain situations, emotional intelligence, building relationships, and that's kind of the recap. That's really what it's all about, is building relationships and trying to get work done through others. So I definitely enjoyed my time with Joan in the interview, but as well as I'm going to continue to enjoy that contact, that mentorship that she has provided going forward. And guess what? This is an actual picture of Joan. So that's what she looked like. If you wanted to get that in mind with who I was with for a few hours back in February. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me before or after the completion of our course. Thank you.